So today last week we looked at dominion and what that meant, and who has dominion, etc. And of course, kings have dominion. And there's this question that I thought we'd look at this week. We didn't quite get to last week. It's the question of God setting up kings. Does he actually do that? Okay, Axel, if you could read, please, Daniel 2:21.
Daniel 2:21. And he changed the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding.
Okay, so it's telling us that God sets up kings. Some people have a hard time with that, didn't some?
Yeah.
Because
Some
if
are
God
bad
sets
kings.
up, yeah, there's bad kings. We know there's been bad kings and rulers and lots of them. So if God does that, he would seem to be responsible. And some things are not working out very good. So we want to look at that today. So is God responsible for what those kings or earthly rulers are doing? And we think of Pharaoh at the Exodus, and there's many other examples. So let's go back in history a bit and see where this thing about kings began. So there were many kings. There were kings in many countries before the Israelites settled in the Promised Land. The first mention of a king was what? Can anyone remember?
Genesis 10:10. We know that because that's the next line.
Okay, Judy's very sharp here. Is reading my screen. Okay, if we could read Dorothy, Genesis 10:10.
Genesis 10:10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Where is Shinar?
Well, it's in Babylon, what we call Iraq area now.
So
Okay.
Nimrod was a king?
Yes, well, the Nimrod's kingdom. It doesn't say King Nimrod, but Nimrod's kingdom, so we would assume he was a king, right?
Yeah.
So did God set up Nimrod's kingdom, or Nimrod as a king? That's the question.
Sounds like Nimrod set himself up as a king.
Yeah, probably. Evans, can you read Genesis 10:9?
John 10:9.
Genesis 10:9.
Okay, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Yeah.
Please.
There
Here
we
we
go.
go.
No, everybody's frozen.
No, okay. Mighty hunter before the Lord. I'll just read the rest. I think we froze there for a minute because of our connection. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Before the Lord is translated in the Septuagint. That's what LXX means. It's translated as against the Lord. Okay, and he certainly was in defiance of God. So does it make sense that God set him up? Doesn't make sense. I'm going to set this guy up against me. That's kind of working against yourself. And we know there were many kings in Abraham's day. Remember when Abraham went to war to rescue Lot, his nephew? The Bible mentions there were 4 kings fighting against 5. I don't have the verse in here, but you might remember that.
Yeah.
So at least 9 kings in that area involved in that war. So lots of kings early on, as far back as Abraham and even before. So the first mention in the Bible of God setting up a king was in the time of Samuel. So Judy, if you could read 1 Samuel 8:4-6, please.
Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord.
Okay. Is there any indication that God did not like the idea of them having a king, Israel.
Not in that
Not
verse.
yet.
Okay, it comes here in the next passage, 1 Samuel 8, 7-9, that'll be Michael.
And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Verse 9. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them.
Okay. So God said to grant them their request. He told Samuel, go ahead and do that. What do we call that on God's part? What was he doing?
Accommodating
Okay, he was accommodating their
request.
their wishes, even though it wasn't God's will.
And this protest solemnly confirms that God was not in that himself.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
He knew it was not the best for them, but God is very big on free will, right?
Mhm.
He lets us go our way, but he doesn't prevent the circumstances or the consequences when we do that. So he told Samuel to explain to them why it was not a good idea, and Samuel did that. And we see that in verses 10-17, Paul.
So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, this will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s. Will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be performers, cooks, or perfumers, not performers, cooks and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants.
Okay, so God is telling them very clearly what the consequences would be. God obviously has seen other kings and other kingdoms around the world, and he can see the way it usually goes. Okay, 1 Samuel 8:18. Thomas, if you have that, please.
8:18. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day.
Okay, so will not hear you is kind of a way of saying he's not going to prevent the circumstances,
Consequences.
the consequences. I keep saying that. So it's reap what you sow, right? So even after the dangers of a monarchy were explained to them, they still insisted on having a king. Okay, and we see that in verses 19-22. Back to Axel, please.
Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, go ye every man into his city.
Okay. So these kings would then be reigning in place of God in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of shown by this verse in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 29:23. Dorothy, 1 Chronicles 29:23.
Then Samuel sat on the throne of the Lord as king instead of David his father, and prospered, and all Israel obeyed him.
Okay, so when Solomon was king, it is said that he was on the throne of the Lord. He wasn't on Solomon's throne. I mean, it was his throne, but he was there in place of God, in a sense. Okay, okay, so they're going to set up to establish a king. They've requested it. God's protested and said, no, you don't want to do that. And they said, yes, we do. And they said, okay. And since there was no king before that in Israel, who's going to be king? Normally you become king when your father dies as king or something like that. There's no line of succession. But so it was up to God basically to give them a king. He knew the sort of king they desired. And he made a decision to choose a man who would please them. Okay, this again is further accommodation. He's not only giving them a king, he's giving them the sort of king they wanted. So on the day the king was presented, they were reminded again that it was not a good idea. 1 Samuel 10:19, that's Evans.
Okay, and ye have this day rejected your God, who himself served you out of all the years, adversary and your tribulation, and ye have said unto him, nay, but set a king over you. Now, therefore, present yourself before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands.
Okay, thank you. 5.
And Samuel said to all the people, do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people? So all the people shouted and said, long live the king. Then Samuel explained to the people the behavior of royalty and wrote it in a book and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house.
Okay, so Samuel told them the manner of the kingdom or what rulers are like.
And he wrote it down in a book. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So the first king, of course, was
Mhm.
Saul, King Saul. So had God chosen Saul to be king?
I'm going to say yes and no.
Okay, that's a good answer, I think. In what way yes, in what way no?
Well, no, in the sense he told him what's going to happen. And yes, in the sense that, as you mentioned, that there'd been no king before them. So there's no succession. So he's the one who has to be influencing the masses to accept Saul. And Saul stood out also physically. He was tall,
Yeah.
he was handsome, blonde, and they figured, oh, this is good. He'll be a good king.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes and no, I think.
Okay, so God didn't want them to have a king at all,
No.
but he gave in to their demand and he gave them the sort of king they wanted. He was trying to make them happy, I guess. So the manner of the kingdom that Samuel wrote in a book was that what he had told them earlier. After Saul's first military victory as king, Samuel presented him again, confirming that he was their choice. Okay, so 1 Samuel 12:13, Paul. Michael.
12:13.
Yeah.
Now therefore, behold the king whom ye have chosen, and whom ye have desired, and behold, the Lord has set a king over you.
Okay, so really Saul was their choice as king, not God's.
Yeah.
Another accommodation by God. And God picked Saul because he was the man who matched what they wanted, what the people wanted.
Basically.
Yeah. If God had felt free to pick a man to be king that he wanted, the sort of man he wanted, that would have been someone like, who do you think?
Yeshua.
Well, it would have been someone like Samuel.
Like Samuel or like himself?
Okay, I put a blank here for you to fill in.
We're trying to fill it in.
Okay, well, those are okay answers. I'm looking for a particular one that comes out in another verse, actually.
David?
Yes,
Mm,
a man after mine own heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, he did pick him later. And again, he picked a king, but he picked one that he desired. If they had to have a king, that's the sort of king he would pick among the people. Okay? Okay, 1 Samuel 12, 19 to 20, that's Paul.
And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves. Then Samuel said to the people, do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart.
Okay, so even the people at some point recognized that what they had done to ask for a king was evil.
mm,
Okay.
Yeah.
So while they had done wickedly, they had not totally turned from God, and he continued to work with them despite their choices. God is very gracious always. So even when Saul didn't work out, God continued allowing the monarchy, but this time, for the second king, he personally chose that king. So let's read 1 Samuel 13, 14. Thomas.
13:14. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee.
Okay, thank you.
mm,
So God, while not approving, worked with them within the choices they had made. Okay. It's kind of like he didn't approve of them going to war, but when they picked up the weapons of the Egyptians and they insisted on fighting their own battles, he didn't stop them from doing that. He actually helped them along the way with military advice, I guess, but that was never his first choice. So we know that God did not approve of Israel having a monarchy, but it continued to accommodate them. But where did it lead? Not in a good way.
mm.
Okay, the next verse here will show us that originally, to begin with, God was their king. 1 Samuel 12, 12.
Who's that?
1 Samuel 12, 12. And when ye saw that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, came against you, you said unto me, nay, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king.
So this is really pointing out that God was originally their king, their leader. Okay, but they evidently didn't like that. Ultimately, when you're thinking of Israel, they, or at least their leaders, said, this is amazing where they got to with this.
Pretty bad. Yeah.
John 19, 15, Dorothy.
Away with him, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. Oh dear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, totally rejecting God and his son as their king. So God sets up kings, that's obvious, in the way he does.
Time.
Yes. The next question is why, and we'll look at that after we take a break here for about 10 minutes. So let's take a break
Oh, no.
and we will come back.
Very good. Okay.
Just put them there if people want. Yeah. Don't want to mess with people.
Okay, so we've looked at God accommodating Israel's wish to have a king, and so we'll continue here. So as an accommodation for man's needs or desires, and because God highly honors free will, well, that's why he does it, okay? So let's go back to the origin of kings on earth. Were there any kings before the flood?
Oh,
No, they may not have been recorded as such, but
Nimrod.
I believe there would have been
Nimrod was
many.
king.
Nimrod was after the flood.
Yes.
Was he?
Yes.
That's true.
Would Cain be considered a king?
Would Cain be considered a king? I don't think so. No, there's
Who be
no
considered a king?
Cain.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no record that he established
King of
anything
his
really
own life.
beyond his
Okay,
own
so
family.
so if I'm correct, we're looking at the not so much as the what's the word I'm looking for? We're looking at the title king and kingship, but not so much the spirit of in terms of him being in an authority position, because based on what spirit of prophecy says, it appears that there were two sets of people on the earth. There were those who lived in the valleys, who gravitated to Cain, and those who lived in the mountains, who were what's the other person? Who of course were sons of God.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes,
I take it that he was the leader, and maybe not bearing the title king, but he exercised some authority, and the same his spirit directed everything that they did. So in that sense, I'm led to believe that possibly he was a king, not in the use of the word king, but in the whole description of what a king does in
Okay.
rulership.
Yeah, I don't, the Bible doesn't talk of Cain being a king, but you're right in the sense there was really two groups of people. And what we're going to find is, of course, one group, the godly group, had or was meant to have God as their king. And the other
Hmm.
group set up their own kings as leaders in rejection of God's rulership over them.
Okay.
But just this question, there were no kings before the flood, and I don't read of any anyway. Of course, the flood comes along as early as Genesis chapter 8 or 6. Yeah, 6. Why not? Why weren't there kings before the flood? Any thoughts?
I have
God was their king,
Well, because God was their king.
Well,
sort of.
he wanted to be their king. They didn't pay him much regard. You look at the time just before the flood, and they were ignoring God. But why didn't they even have their own kings? Why didn't they set up kings themselves?
Because they all spoke the one language and they all were one people.
Okay,
So there weren't different nationalities,
that's right.
shall we say?
Yeah.
And every,
What was that, Judy?
I said there weren't any different nationalities. This was before the Tower of Babel, where they all spoke the same language. They
Yeah.
all had the same origins. It wasn't too far from creation and from Adam, and so through their oral history, they probably knew that they were all one people.
Yeah.
I don't know. And before the flood, all their needs were supplied. There's nothing to fight about.
That's it.
You know, these days they're always fighting over land and resources and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, we normally associate kings with nations, don't we? There weren't
Mhm.
separate nations, and as Judy said, all their needs were provided. This is before the flood. There was an abundance of everything.
You
Can
know,
I just say
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Based on what quotation am I going to use for this? But didn't the same behaviors, the same customs before the flood exist even today? Didn't Christ say that before he comes, it's the same customs and attitudes that would prevail just as before the flood?
Yes, he did say that. These next couple of
Why-
verses, I think, will show us the ways in which it is going to be similar now to before the flood.
Okay, one more thing, and it is, I'm thinking that the need for kingship comes out of apostasy, a rejection of what God has established, the order of things. And it's based on 1 Samuel 12, which we just read, where it says, "Nay, but a king shall reign over us." That is what the people are saying to God. When the Lord, your God, was your king, and God is emphasizing that this is really what it should be, but then you want something else. If you look at Judges chapter 9, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that allegory. Judges chapter 9, verses 8. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but it's Judges chapter 9, verse 8 to 15, where it speaks of the trees and various trees, the olive tree, the what's the other one? The fig tree, the vine, all of them having different characteristics. Now, if you look at what tree is, somewhere it speaks of trees. I think it's like Isaiah 61:3. It speaks of trees being trees of righteousness. So that behavior in the trees being trees of righteousness called of God, requesting different trees to exercise lordship over them. And trees and the characteristics, it's symbolic of possibly the characteristics of God's people, or characteristics of God, if you will. But then they end up asking for a bramble bush, which is totally different to those, the vine, the olive. And it speaks of the bramble bush. In the end, it speaks of the bramble bush devouring the cedars of Lebanon. So maybe that's something that we could probably look into later on down the line. It seems to speak of an apostasy occurring, or apostasy, desiring a king is the result of apostatizing, going against what God established.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Axel. I want to mention a couple things here. There's a verse, I'd have to find it, that says, it is not in man to direct his steps. Which
Pardon me?
tells me that it is not in man to direct his steps. In
Okay, yeah.
other words, we don't have the capacity to, properly go in the right direction and make the right decisions, etc. God can do that for us, but if we reject his reign, then we look for others to do that for us. And you see that terribly in people today. They don't want to investigate for themselves, to make their own decisions. They just want the government, the kings, to do everything for them. Okay. What you brought up, Axel, about Judges 9 is good too. There's a verse, Jesus healed the blind man, and it kind of took two stages, I guess. And after the first one, he said, I see people as trees walking. So trees represent people.
Mhm.
And so here in Judges 9, the trees are looking for, or the people are looking for a king to reign over them. They kind of select between the olive tree and whatever other ones it mentions there, and they end up with a bramble bush.
Mhm.
The bramble bush, of course, has thorns on it and could represent a curse.
Mhm.
And this is exactly what happened when they ended up with a king. It was a curse to them. So that may be how that Judges 9 story fits in there. So that's good. Okay.
So, I just have a question. Before
yeah.
the flood, every thought of man's heart was only evil continually, and yet they had no kings.
Right.
But they were rejecting God
Yes.
even then.
Yes. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. They didn't have earthly kings, and they didn't have a heavenly king. I mean, God was their king, but they were disregarding him.
so they might not have had kings because the thought never came to them.
And you're right too. There wasn't such a need. I mean, the earth was plenteous with food and resources and everything at that point.
I wonder what the population was.
Yes. So things changed around the time of the flood. Let's read Genesis 6:11. Evans, if you have that, please. Genesis 6:11.
Okay, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence.
Okay, the earth was filled with violence.
Yeah.
Kind of like the state described in Judges 17:6, Judy.
In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Okay, so this is describing the time of the judges after the Israelites were established back in the promised land, but before they had kings. No king in Israel. And what I'm saying is perhaps that's kind of like what it was before the flood.
Yeah.
So everyone did what they thought was right, which is a way of saying everyone did what they wanted. Why? Why was it like that?
Because everybody's selfish,
Yeah, okay.
thinking of themselves.
If I do what I want, it's because I'm selfish. Okay.
Flesh, not in the spirit.
Yeah, so there was no king, no rule of law,
There's no restraint,
no restraint.
physically, spiritually.
Yeah, it was like the wild, wild west. Okay. And this was the result when we come up to the time of the flood. Genesis 6:13, Michael.
And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Okay, we want to properly understand what that means, that he would destroy them. But
Yeah,
the first part of it, the end of all flesh has come before me, is God saying, I'm watching what's going on down there, and they're about to kill themselves off. They're so violent, so corrupt. And so he wanted to do something about that. Well, he wanted to save them from the destruction that was coming, is a better way to say it. And then after the flood, we get this verse, which sounds a bit strange coming from God. Paul, Genesis 9:6, please.
Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed.
Okay. Why would God say that?
Telling you what you sow, you will reap.
Okay. Let's read it. Thomas, if you could read, and you'd have to read from the screen probably, Genesis 9:6 from the Remedy. That's another version, Remedy New Testament.
Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man.
Okay. Yeah, I'll read it here from the Remedy. It's just another version. Whoever commits
don't-
murder by human authorities, they are to be killed, for God made humans in his image. Okay.
I don't like that.
Well, this part is good because he's not saying that he is going to kill them,
Right.
but he is saying that there should be capital punishment, basically. Why would God do that?
Well, I think Satan's the author of capital punishment, frankly.
He's the author of death.
Or the author of
Yeah.
death too. Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't a command, maybe it was a prediction.
Yeah,
Right.
because
This would happen.
when you're involved with violence, you're gonna give it and then you're gonna receive it at some point if you
Especially
last
if you
that
give
long.
up.
Okay. I put down as an accommodation to the needs of man, but that might not be right.
It was for what purpose? Prevention.
Prevention or restraint, yes, Dorothy.
Yeah.
But it could be too that it was a way of saying you reap what you sow, or there's the verse that says, he who takes the sword will die by the sword.
Yeah.
Sort of predictive in that sense. If you go around killing people, someone's going to take revenge on you and you'll likely die too.
Yeah.
That could be what it means.
Yeah.
Could well be.
Well, okay, later he set up, this is after the flood, right?
Yeah.
But later he set up cities of refuge so that someone who had killed somebody had a chance to escape and not be killed.
Yeah,
That was later.
yes, but that's a good point because I'd have to read about that more carefully.
Yeah,
This is in the case of someone who
unintentionally,
unintentionally, okay,
I think so.
yeah, I think it
Unintentionally
was
killed someone.
unintentional.
Manslaughter. They called him the manslayer, and that's
Yes.
what we call manslaughter today, which often
Right,
means unintentional Well, yeah,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
first
not-
degree, not second degree, but
not
then
premeditated.
manslaughter,
Not premeditated.
not
Mhm.
premeditated
Yeah.
in the heat of the moment. Unintentional.
Oh, yeah, okay, to help limit violence or put a restraint on violence. Okay, a couple of possibilities there. So Paul speaks the same way of rulers in his day, having the role of maintaining order. Okay, so we're going to get closer to our time now. This is Axel, please, Romans 13, 1-7.
Romans 13, 1-7. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor.
Okay, thank you. I've got a note here that power in that passage is from the Greek word exousia rather than the Greek word dynamis. So it means authority rather than power, like dynamite, like dynamite or power. So this is ordained of God. Okay. The powers that be are ordained of God. God saw, this is one way of putting it, that man needed, because again, man, it's not within man to direct his steps. He needs rulers over him. Men hopefully under God who are wise enough to, to oversee what's happening.
This passage, these passages here from Romans 13, I've wondered about them in the past. There are numerous other verses that tend to indicate that the rulership referred to is the rulership for those for good. But we do not have leaders today in the world that are doing anything for our good. Indeed, they're doing everything to harm us and to destroy us. It's quite the opposite to what this tends to indicate.
Yep.
Because the rulers today are working to evil and not to good.
Of course, there are leaders at all different levels, and we have civil leaders, and they, the city council in Greenwood may be looking out for our good, at least hopefully some of them are.
Well,
But I know you're making a kind of a general statement.
blanket statement.
The people at the top are the worst ones, it seems.
Well,
We could go a long way on this one.
the part that I don't like is they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. I mean, if you resist, of course, like you said, that's good leaders. It's not
Good,
evil leaders.
right.
Like if you resisted Adolf Hitler when he was in power,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't get damnation.
Okay, so you're referring to this, wherefore, whosoever therefore resisteth the power ordained of God, resisteth the ordinance of God.
Yeah, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation, it says.
Okay,
The
so,
rulers are not a terror to good works. Well, they shouldn't be a terror to good
yeah,
works.
so no doubt there were some good rulers. Perhaps they're becoming, well, not perhaps, they're becoming fewer and fewer now, as Michael has pointed out.
Hebrews 13 touches on this a bit, talking
Lots
about,
of
remember, which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God. So the rulers referred to are those who are obeying the truth. In verse 17, obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls as they that must give account. Now, the earthly governments do not watch for our souls, nor do they give account. So I tend to think if we,
What passage was that?
Hebrews
13.
13, 17.
That sounds more like leaders in the church.
Yes, it does, but it also, we've got to look at principle, and also verse 7, who have spoken the word of God to you.
Yeah, that's in the church, but,
So anyway, this may be going off in a slightly different direction from where you are there. So
okay, it's hard sometimes to bring in everything that
Yes,
applies, but if you
yeah.
want to study it out,
Yeah.
that's what you want to do.
but you see, God allowed the Israelites to appoint, well, to accept and endorse Saul, and yet we know it wasn't his desire for that to occur. It's the same here with Romans 13, I believe. The same principle must apply. We're not being told to obey all these leaders who want us to line up and all get, commit suicide with their drugs and stuff. So I think there's more to this. And this was brought up the other month by, what's his name, who also did a study on Matthew 12:48, down south there, the chiropractor fellow.
Tim Jennings? No.
No,
different
not
guy.
Jenny. Anyway, I think there's more to come out as a result of this anyway. I know.
Yep. Okay, let's go on here.
Sorry.
So no, it's all good stuff. So many such things, like we talked about, are not God's perfect will because they are not the best way, but accommodations to the state and needs and sometimes the stubbornness of man. The results show that having a king was not a good idea. Okay, let's read Nehemiah 9:37. Dorothy.
9:37. The lush produce of this land piles up in the hands of the kings whom you have set over us because of our sins. They have power over us and our livestock. We serve them at their pleasure, and we are in great misery. It's just what
Okay.
God told them.
Now let's read it from, if Judy, if you could read this from the New Living Translation, the same verse, Nehemiah 9:37.
The lush produce of this land piles up in the hands of the kings whom you have set over us because of our sins. They have power over us and our livestock. We serve them at their pleasure, and we are in great misery.
Okay, so this is the people talking about their experience under the hands of their kings.
Okay.
The lush produce of this land piles up in the hands of the kings whom you have set over us.
Yeah, that I don't know what that you.
Yeah. Well, God only set it up for them by saying, okay, you want a king?
Yeah.
And he told them what would happen, right? And now if we go down here, okay, so they're saying what's happening with their kings. Now, if we go back to 1 Samuel, where Samuel told them what would happen, let's read this, 1 Samuel 8:14-17. That would be Michael. And as he reads that, I've got it on the screen here, and I have highlighted some parts, and I want you to match the green for green and the yellow for yellow. Okay, 1 Samuel 8:14-17 with this verse in Nehemiah, and you'll see that what he predicted in Samuel is exactly what they said happened in Nehemiah.
And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. We read this before, didn't we?
Yes, so that's equivalent to the produce of this land piles up in the hands of the king. So
Right.
they take it all.
Taxes, in other words.
Yeah.
And he will take the 10th of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your manservants and your maidservants and your goodliest young men and your asses and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants.
Okay. So that this yellow highlighted part here corresponds to what they said actually happened. Have power over us and our livestock. He will take your men servants and maid servants and your animals for his use. So we could say, I told you so.
We've gone a lot further than just 10% today.
Yeah, tax-free days sometime in June.
So true.
So are all kings and rulers set up and removed by God? Because when you look at the verse to begin with here, he removeth kings and setteth up kings. That makes it sound like God does that, right? But the question is, does he always do that? Does he do that in every case? So let's read Hosea 8, verses 3 to 4. Paul.
Israel has rejected the good, the enemy will pursue him. They set up kings, but not by me. They made princes, but I did not acknowledge them. From their silver and gold, they made idols for themselves, that they might be cut off.
Okay, so it's talking about Israel. It says that they have set up kings, but not by me. Okay. So if they set up kings, the kings they set up were not set up by God. Right. So obviously God didn't set them up in every case. There were many evil kings who were kings by virtue of heredity rather than commission from God, right? There were men who became kings by assassinating existing kings and taking over the throne. Did God set them up? I don't think so. Would his choice to have been to have rulers qualified by heredity or by suitability? Yeah, they need to be suitable, have the right heart and follow him.
Although there is such a thing as the bloodline that God wanted to be kept healthy, looking at not just the physical blood, but primarily on the spiritual connection.
Yeah, they would not lack a man on the throne or something about.
Right.
Did Herod bribe his way into being king?
I don't know if he did, but I know that the Romans
They appointed him.
appointed the high priest.
He was a Roman, wasn't he?
Why is it?
Yeah, he was a ruler, King Herod.
A Roman king.
Well, appointed by Rome.
Yeah, appointed by
But
Rome.
he was a Jew.
I think so.
So-
Appointed by Rome. Yeah. So this passage is important because it's saying that Israel has set up kings. Okay, so God didn't do it in every case, and that's important because when people read that verse at the start there, they think, well, God sets up all kings and rulers, and they go off in wrong directions because of that. So he does not always set them up, neither does he remove them in every case. Hosea 7:7, be Thomas, please.
They are all hot as an oven and have devoured their judges. All their kings are fallen. There is none among them that calleth unto me.
Okay, so they is referring to Israel. They've devoured their judges, and I think this is saying that, they caused their kings to fall as well, at least in many cases. And this really comes out. Here's a little quotation from the Bible commentary. During this final period in Israel's history, 4 out of 5 kings were put to death in 20 years, the victims being these 4 names. In the earlier days of the northern kingdom, several other kings were slain by their successors or died violently or mysteriously. Of the 20 kings of Israel, remember it was a divided kingdom, only these 9 died natural deaths. Okay, So many of them died as a result of assassinations, etc. This is just something I thought of back from my childhood. On November 22nd, 1963, late in the morning at age 10, I'm in grade 4, I was in the chapel of the Catholic school I attended, in the room behind the altar with the priest, getting ready to come out and start mass when a nun came in and told us that President Kennedy had been shot. I don't remember that anyone in that setting blamed God. Was God responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy?
No.
No, God didn't kill him.
That's what I did.
Yeah, there was a lot of
Or
funny stuff going on
someone
with that,
else,
of
oh,
course.
yeah.
We won't get into that. So there's lots of problems with kings and rulers. I'm going to start to put rulers together because, I mean, there are many heads of state now who we don't call a king, but they're the equivalent. So while there have been good rulers, there have been many with serious problems. And there is this tendency, we have this saying actually, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like that power goes to their heads and results in all kinds of problems. Let's read Psalm, this will be Axel, Psalm 2, verses 2 to 6, please.
It's my next verse. You got a bunch of doubt. Gene.
The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee.
Okay, thank you. I've rearranged the list here because Evans is no longer with us here. I'll just put this little note in. It says, the king shall laugh, or God shall laugh. Or is that?
The Lord shall have them in derision. It says.
Yeah, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. Just a note from the Bible commentary. God is conceived of, or in figure described as possessing human attributes. The Talmud says, this is interesting, the Talmud says the Torah speaks in the language of the children of men. Okay, so is God actually laughing at the suffering? No,
No.
no. But it's just, that kind of explains it. Okay, I see what we've done here. Let's read Acts 4:18 to 20. Ask Dorothy.
And they called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, rulers and elders of Israel, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard.
Okay, why is that verse important in this study?
Because if a command of a ruler goes contrary to what God wants, then you're supposed to listen to God,
Okay,
not to the rulers.
good. We should obey rulers, but
But
when they go against God, God's will, God's commands, God's laws come first. Okay, we have the example of the three Hebrews in Daniel. Judy, if you could read Daniel 3:14-18.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. Shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning.
You've frozen.
O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold which you have set up.
Do I start the recording again?
Yes, you did.
I did, okay, good. Okay, thank
Pretty
you.
sure you did. I'm not sure you did.
We begin to doubt ourselves.
If you did. I think you did.
Okay, so this is a good case of disobeying the king in obedience to God. Okay,
Mhm.
let's get the order right here. Sin with sin is a way to put it. And let's read Isaiah 10, 5-6. Michael, if you have that, please. Isaiah 10, verses 5 and 6.
O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil and to take the prey and to tread them down like the mire of the streets.
Okay,
He's no different than we are.
yeah, yeah.
No.
Okay.
That's a prophecy soon to be fulfilled again.
Okay, we know there's often an application and a fulfillment. So in prophecy, so we need to be looking out for that. Absolutely. It's interesting that send here. I will send him against. Send is the Hebrew word shalak, which is used very commonly when God says, I will send pestilence and such things. It's used in the permissive sense. So it would be better to read, I will allow him to come against you, something like that. Okay. This page, I've got the link here, helps to explain this means of punishment. Okay, it's the glossary definition page about punishment, and explains this use of sending like that. So now let's apply some of this today. Think about how this applies to us. Matthew 22:21, Paul.
They said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.
Okay, so we know this is, they were asking Christ about paying taxes, basically, and he asked them what image is on this coin, and they reply in this verse. So how do we honor that command, or how do we apply that in our day?
Pay our taxes to the state or the province or the country, and we pay our tithe and offerings to God,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. If you're looking money wise.
Yeah, if we look at our money, if I grab my wallet here and took out a bill, you see the Queen on it. Now, of course, the Queen is no longer with us. But the point is that we should pay our taxes, and we drive on the roads and everything else. It is right to do that, but we need to make a separation between what we owe to Caesar, so to speak, and what we owe to God.
I just remembered a brother who's in the Reformation movement, and he he owns a farm as well. And he said, you know what? After reading, he prepared a bundle. He took 1/10 of all his produce and he brought it to the Adventist church.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
The pastor was furious. Yeah. I remember that.
well, we need to do that intelligently. I mean, you could convert that to its monetary value and bring that. I mean, don't be a burden on the pastor by bringing him a
I think he was trying to make a statement, because if you know him,
Okay.
He was trying to make a statement.
I remember when I was on the board of an organization keeping the feasts up in Oriana, British Columbia. One day this
Mhm.
fellow drove in and opened up the back of his truck, and he had on it a whole bunch of oak tree seedlings.
Mhm.
He was wanting to tithe his acorns, and he was proposing them to plant them all around the property. And I said, "That's not a good idea. We're only renting this property. You can't do that." It's another extreme example. And oh man,
The thing is, with this brother, he built the church. He started the church in that area. And the conference, of course, they took over and whatnot.
yes.
And they were giving him a hard time. He would put his hands up to speak and they wouldn't, So he said, you know what? It's almost like he said, I'm going to begin tithing in produce.
Yes.
And that's when he did that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here's a verse, and I didn't get it on the list here, so I'll read Romans 13:3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. So they could call you a good citizen. You pay your taxes, you don't cause problems or whatever.
Do what we can.
Yeah. But if you do, you litter all over and you knock down your neighbor's fence and you do all sorts of bad things, then they'll be a terror to you because they're trying to maintain law and order. Now, regarding paying taxes and this sort of thing, rendering unto Caesar, did Yeshua himself live by this? Let's read Matthew 17:24-27, Thomas.
And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? He saith, Yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, Then are the children free? Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast an hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take that and give unto them for me and thee.
I think that's such a cool story. That's amazing. And as a biologist studying or working in fisheries, I have sampled many fish, thousands.
And none of them had a coin in their mouth.
No, none of them had a coin in the mouth. And here, this very one that Peter caught exactly had what Jesus said can happen. So he paid his taxes, didn't he?
Yeah, I never thought of that, but yes, he did.
He did. But he
Yeah.
did it in such a way as to show them what?
But he didn't really have to pay the taxes. He was the son of God. He was
Yeah.
showing them he was the son of God. But he said, notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, do it. Do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right, lest we should offend them.
He was the son of the king.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a way of stating that he was authorized as the Son of God to preach. I mean, they were objecting to everything he said, really. Okay. Matthew 6:24. Axel, please.
No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. He cannot serve God and mammon.
Okay, I just realized Evans is no longer here, so I'm going to shrink this down a bit so I can see the other list. Okay, thank you. The powers that be are ordained of God. So how do we understand that in light of everything we've looked at so far? Are the powers that be, kings and rulers and prime ministers and things, are they ordained of God? Or in what way are they ordained of God?
he allows them to assume their authority, doesn't stand in the way of it.
Okay,
Again, we have to go back to the principle with Saul and Samuel, that he wouldn't stand in the way of it, and he what's the word? Objected to it,
Mhm.
right? And so in that respect, yeah, you could say they're ordained, but he doesn't condone what they do.
right. So he ordained the principle of establishing powers to maintain order, etc.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that he ordained every earthly ruler or put them in their position,
Yeah.
because we know there's been some very bad ones. And we can see how it doesn't mean that. The original verse doesn't mean that. Okay, Exodus 22:28. Judy.
You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people.
Okay, you have the New King James, and King James is actually, thou shalt not revile the gods.
Mine says God.
Yeah. Well, God might be more accurate. Yeah. You shouldn't curse the rulers of your people. That's what I was focusing on more, but revile the gods. I mean, God himself, the true God, said you shouldn't even mention the name of those false gods. I mean, they were perhaps worthy of being reviled, and they're not true anyway. They're all false gods. So, okay, we're just going to quickly look at. We're not going to read the whole story, but we have two cases here of things that have happened and I think will happen in the future. Two classes of ways worship is, well, in the first case, false worship imposed. Okay, in Daniel 3. Someone just like to relate in a couple sentences what happened there. How was false worship imposed by King Nebuchadnezzar?
It forced everybody to fall down, or otherwise you get chucked in the fiery furnace.
Okay, what would we relate that to today, or say in the near future? An issue at the end of time. This is about false worship being imposed.
Sunday law.
The mark of the beast.
Sunday law, exactly. Sunday, as opposed to Sabbath. So in false worship imposed in the future, we expect Sunday worship to be imposed and forced. We also can see that true worship will be forbidden. And what was the situation in Daniel 6 in which true worship was forbidden?
I think the state sought to intervene or impose its agenda above that of God, and so the matters of conscience, the free exercise of conscience, was impeded.
Yes. Okay, and what was the example in Daniel 6 of impeding the free exercise of conscience?
You weren't supposed to pray to anybody but the king or Darius.
Okay, good. She was saying they were to pray only to the king. Okay, and we could call that equivalent to forbidding worship on Sabbath in the time to come.
Yeah.
So we got the false worship, the true worship in Daniel 3 and Daniel 6, and we can relate that to Sunday worship being imposed or Sabbath worship being forbidden in the future. Okay, Luke 21:12, Michael.
But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake.
Okay, so we're to obey kings and rulers and things. But here's a prophecy in Luke 21, of course, is equivalent to Matthew 24, talking about the end of time and saying that you will be brought into prisons and before kings and rulers for doing something wrong in their eyes. So I put here, get arrested for blank, not for civil disobedience. Get arrested for what?
Obedience to
For
God.
obedience, or from the verse here, for my name's sake.
Spreading the good news about God.
Okay, spreading the good news about God for the sake of his name is the same thing. So get arrested for that, not for civil disobedience. Yeah, we should try not to get arrested at first for the wrong things. 1 Peter 3:14, Paul.
But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled.
Okay. Acts 5:29, Thomas.
Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men.
Okay, so that's the principle we go by when the two are in opposition to each other. So kind of in conclusion, God is to have first place in our lives. That's reflected in Acts 5:29, which we just read. We need to recognize that earthly rulers are an accommodation on God's part, and there's a better way coming. Okay, we really want God himself to be our ruler, don't we? And 1 Timothy 1:17 speaks of that. Axel.
Now unto the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, the only wise God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen.
Okay, so this is God himself is our king.
Yeah.
So this whole study illustrates the danger of taking that verse. He removeth kings and setting up kings. The danger of reading that and ascribing responsibility to God incorrectly. Okay, he doesn't set up every king, every ruler on earth. There's Hitlers, there's people that were opposed to him. We saw verses like that. In fact, the better way when we are determining whether or not God is responsible for a biblical event, something bad that happens, would be to determine if the action is evil. Okay, and if so, determine that God cannot be responsible, and then look for another cause. So people will read things, God sent a plague or whatever. Well, God did it. Well, the better way is to say, well, God wouldn't do that. It's out of character to him. So what is the explanation? How does this work? That's the way we should do it. We should assume first that God is always good, and then try to explain where it doesn't sound like he's good. Okay. So last question here. What do examples of accommodation on God's part show us about God?
It's very accommodating.
Okay, he's very accommodating.
He's
True.
loving. He's not intrusive. He's not going to stomp on your ideas and beliefs. He's going to let you work it out for yourself.
Free
in a
choice.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
Free choice. That's
Yeah.
that's the big one. Free choice. Yeah. Yeah. He honors our free will. He lets us go our way, but always the consequences are there.
One of the things that we can perceive here is a simple one, is that he hears us and will accommodate some of our requests, even if they are not good.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If it's his will.
Well, he'll let us do things that aren't even our will, and it was never his will that man should have kings. But it's his will that we get to exercise our will, you can say.
Isn't there a scripture, I've come to do thy will, O God?
Yes.
In the volume of the book it is written of me or
Yes.
something?
But that was spoken by someone, his son, who is totally in tune
Yeah.
with how good God is, had no doubts about his father's
Right.
rulership,
Yeah.
etc. We've got to overcome this idea that God is somehow against us. He's always for us.
Some monster.
Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts, questions, comments?
It's good.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Not
It's
very good.
it's all kind of because you hear this. I'll just read this verse again here, Daniel 2:21. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. Okay, people read that and they take it incorrectly to mean that God's responsible for all kings and rulers, and it doesn't even make sense. Okay, so hopefully this study has helped us to see in what way he sets up kings, etc.
Mhm.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yes.